Hello all, my name is Amira Armond, and we have Logan Therrien. We're both from Curie Solutions, an authorized C3PAO. And we're doing a bit of a training and education video today because Logan has been, on my team working with potential clients who have been asking for formal CMMC assessments or 800-171 assessments under the Joint Surveillance Voluntary Assessment Program. And we're starting to notice a change in the way that the clients are responding to our questionnaire, which is cool. It's kind of a good change, but there's also a problem with it. So Logan, what's happened?
Yes, ma'am. So during the I guess questionnaire phase, when we're looking at whether or not we can take new clients on board for assessments, there's some questions we asked again regarding are there any practices that you've assessed to be not met, right? And was that assessment self-assessment or was it a third-party organization that came in and helped you? And I'm starting to see more of a third-party organization. That box clicked yes. So it opens the floor for new questions on how that assessment was completed. And what I'm finding more and more of is that the response is that it was completed at a top level assessment and based on 171 practices. So the practices instead of the assessment objectives. So uh, it's not as granular as it should be.
So let me make sure I understand. So part of our process when we're giving quotes for assessment is we're trying to make sure that the company actually understands what they're getting into. That hopefully the assessment is going to go well. Hopefully the client will pass with flying colors on the first attempt. We would prefer to try and catch people who are not ready way early in the process, right before they've spent any money, and say, whoa, there's an obvious problem here. Why don't you go work with your consultant and improve your situation before you pay us money with a result where you're going to fail because you don't know what you're doing, right? Or there's obvious misinterpretations, or perhaps you have a practice that's not implemented, right? So generally it's a red flag if you're saying, come in and assess me. I need a perfect score to get a CMMC certification. But by the way, I have known things that are not ready. That's a bit of a red flag. We're trying to not do assessments of those clients. We'd prefer them to come back and be ready when they sign up. So anyways, so you're saying that the change is that now we're getting companies that have had a gap analysis, maybe by a third party cybersecurity firm, maybe by an RPO, maybe by an independent consultant, but they're responding and saying that the assessment was not performed to the assessment objective level. It's at the 110 practices, not the 320 assessment objectives.
That's correct. Yes.
Oof, that's bad. So okay, so tell me more. What's the problem?
Okay, so this is kind of a basics, like so going back to the basics of what I could present a problem. Let me share my screen with you. My screen. All right, so back up. All right, so DFARS clause 7012. If you're not familiar with it, if you're moving in, if you're a contractor or a subcontractor in the defense industry, you should be familiar with DFARS 7012. It's a acquisition clause that you'll find in your contract that says you have to maintain certain security requirements to be a part of that contract. In the statements, and Amir, would you like to add anything to that?
No, that was pretty good. It's that DFAR 7012 clause is the rule that came out, say, 7 years ago, which CMMC is now enforcing. Right. So DFARS is what says you need to be cybersecurity, you need to do cybersecurity. CMMC is validating that you have done cybersecurity. All right, back to you.
All right, so in there, it does mention 171, right? So if I go to NIST 800-171, which is, let's see, give you an example of a practice statement. So this is the practice. This is all you're going to see in that manual, in that publication. Is the requirement is that ensure that managers, system administrators, and users of organizational systems are made aware of security risk, right? It's very general. It can be interpreted many different ways, all right? And that's something that's not good in the assessment field, because we want to be able to see apples to apples, knowing that your expectations of what you need to do are the same thing we're expecting to see. And it's kind of hard to get that from there. So what does provide that granularity is the 171 alpha. Now, of note, 171 alpha is only mentioned 4 times in 171, and it's a very small footnote on page 3. And it says specifically that 171 alpha provides assessment procedures to determine compliance to the CUI security requirements.
So that sentence, that long sentence in the middle of the page, that's one of the requirements in 800-171. There's 110 total, and they range from stuff like access control for user accounts to how do you configure your firewalls. This one specifically is a requirement regarding awareness and training for your users. And yeah, you're right. So when most people see the requirement to perform 800-171, they go find that document, which NIST publishes, and it just has these 110 requirement statements, which are all one sentence each. And some of them are more complex than others. For example, this one has got a bunch of commas in it, which is different ways that you can read, and split it up into different pieces. Okay, back to you.
All right, so if I were to read this, I would, and I was doing a self-assessment. I didn't really know much about the program. I could easily assume that I meet the mark. All right, hey, we had this. We know we do this, right? So what are we going to be looking at? So if you go to 171 alpha, it looks completely different, right? So here's still that general practice statement of the 110 statements are in 171, but here's 4 assessment objectives that have been pulled from that. And these are very specific. And there's a chance that if you did not look at this, you could miss one of these and fail the practice overall.
Right. So, we're coming at you from the assessor standpoint here. And anybody who's helping you as a consultant, we also do that, should be extremely aware of these assessment objectives, because these are actually your yes or no, pass or fail criteria for each of the requirements. So when an assessor is going to come in, if they're a certified assessor, which is the only type that's going to get you a CMMC certification, they are not going to be reading that generic, very complex statement at the top. We're going to be reading each of the assessment objectives, and we're going to be looking at them in total isolation from each other. So, for example, you might have read that requirement, ensure that your managers, users are made aware of security risks and applicable policies and procedures, blah, 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 right? And that's how most people read it. They're like, I'm just going to pick words out of there. It sounds good, right? Well, of course. I teach my users about, cybersecurity concerns. We show them a presentation, but then we get to the first assessment objective. Security risks associated with organizational activities involving CUI are identified. So me as an assessor, I'm looking at every single one of those words individually and trying to see how you're doing them. So does your training or does your policies and procedures or something related to your training identify security risks with organizational activities involving CUI, right? So it's not just generic security risks, it's stuff that has to do with CUI. So we actually need to see that your training includes the topic of CUI as part of it, right? Here's the specific risks related to the fact that we have CUI in our system that you need to be concerned about. Maybe there's increased risk of nation state attackers. Maybe it's easy to forget that this document needs to be protected and you might want to email it to yourself at your personal, your home computer, right? That would be bad. That sort of thing we're actually looking for in this, and it's actually not even mentioned in the security requirement. There's no mention of CUI in that one sentence at the top. So the assessment objective actually adds an undisclosed requirement that you only find out about when you read 171A. And that's a big problem, right? If you're not looking at that. Back to you, Logan.
Right, and then even if you're just reading the assessment objectives, understanding what it actually means, right? So security risk associated with organizational activities, right? The process, what process do you have in place to identify these security risks, right? So generic training, is it applicable that you have everybody taking that handles CUI? Is there a loading dock where things have to be controlled in a certain area? How are you managing those risks that are identified? How are the risk identified? So again, understanding what those assessment objectives are as you go through. And then I guess finally, as CMMC comes into reality here more and more, what does it look like for CMMC assessments, right? So this is from the CMMC assessment guide. This is a lot more words than what was in 171 Alpha and 171. And then we have Carnegie Mellon, we have Johns Hopkins University involved with creating this. So there's additional information in here. So again, my recommendation is if you're going to be assessed, if you're preparing for an assessment, you should be trying as hard as you can to look through the eyes of an assessor, right? What are we going to be referencing when we're doing that process, right? So understanding what these references are is a good start. And then as you're looking to get a gap analysis, doing your homework on the company that's going to be doing it. What is their understanding of the program, kind of getting a litmus test of what are you paying for? What services are you being provided? Their level of knowledge.
So one of the things to remember with these CMMC assessment guides, as well as the 171 document, the discussion and the further discussion that's displayed on the page, those are supplemental information to assessors. This is what we teach assessors. This is supplemental. It's meant for you to better understand the reasoning behind the requirement and the assessment objectives. However, the further discussion are not authoritative in themselves. So if the further discussion says, for some reason, you must encrypt stuff using a certain protocol, that if it doesn't actually follow that up in the assessment objective, we are not necessarily going to require you to do it based on what the further discussion says, because that's less authoritative than the assessment objectives. That the assessment objectives and the requirements themselves are meant to be as flexible as possible while achieving the goal, right, of reducing risk, preventing certain types of attacks. So just it's good to read all that additional to understand the intent, but still focus in on the assessment objectives. The other thing that's important to remember is for you to pass a requirement, right? That sentence at the top, you have to pass every single one of the assessment objectives underneath it. 100%. So even if you do 3 out of 4, right? And there's some requirements that have 10 assessment objectives. You have to get every single one of them in order to pass the overall requirement. And that's a much more stringent test than just kind of reading that sentence and going, it sounds good. You know, I think I'm doing it. The scores, if you look at the scores of companies that assess themselves against the requirement, you know, the practice statement versus assessing themselves against the assessment objectives, right? And let's just say that each company or each type of assessment, they also prepared based on the requirements or they prepared based on the assessment objectives. The requirement level, the companies think they're doing really well, right? They think they're like 90% good to go. When you look at the same company with the assessment objectives, it is a devastating difference. They pop down to 50% or less ready. It's a huge difference. And that's because you have to hit every single one of those assessment objectives. And they're very, very detailed. They're very specific. And a lot of them add to the requirement. Right. So if you didn't know that they exist, you're going to be judged against something that you didn't know you were going to get judged against. So you didn't prepare for it. So anyways, yeah, I guess the moral of the story, when you're about to pay $10,000 or $20,000 to some company to do a gap analysis on you, ask to see what their typical report looks like, and make sure that the report addresses 320 different assessment objectives, not 110 requirements. And if it doesn't address all 320 individually, do not pay them money because it's almost a waste. You're throwing it away. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yep. Cool. Good intel. Thank you, Logan. Hopefully this helps other people.